Rahul Dev Manchanda is a professor, author and attorney with a focus on asbestos litigation and international trade law. With experience at a prominent Manhattan law firm and exposure to diverse legal systems at the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law in Vienna, he's established himself as a knowledgeable and respected professional in the field. And Rahul joins us now from New York, because you can see out the window there's a building that looks very New Yorky, and you were saying that is actually Wall Street, right?
It is.
Yeah. So where's the wolf?
Street.
Are you the wolf?
Am I? Great question.
What was it that prompted you to go down this career path, working in this famous area that you do, and working in law and academia?
Sure. So, I wrote these books, Deep State Defector 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, over the course, since 2016-17, sort of as a catharsis as an attorney that was approaching my 20th year as a practicing lawyer in New York, and having seen over and over again this sort of invisible, wall or shield, if you will, that kept coming up over and over and over again, in the course of litigation, either as a lawyer for my clients or as a litigant personally. And you sort of how dinosaurs, for example, it's like we know what they look like and what they walk like and what they sounded like based on indirect evidence, right?
Yeah.
We've never actually seen a dinosaur because they've been extinct for 65 million years, supposedly. But apparently we have movies like Jurassic Park, which are pretty realistic, and that's based on indirect evidence. And so the deep state was sort of something that came up, in the course of all these conspiracy theories that you would read on the internet and whatnot, and my own research, and they would call it different names, Illuminati, whatever. These kinds of names. If you use these words in polite conversation, people look at you kind of cross-eyed, like, okay, maybe it's time we take an early leave from this conversation. The CIA, for example, said a conspiracy theorist has no credibility. But the reality is, when Donald Trump sort of took office, and they started talking about the deep state, and then you had CIA operatives such as Phil Giraldi, who was a station chief of Turkey for decades, using the term deep state to describe like Turkish government under Ataturk, for example, which would never change. No matter what the administration was, whether it was left or right, liberal, conservative, whatever, the policies and sort of would never change. And it was sort of like this continuation of government. And then things in the newspapers would talk about the shadow government that Dick Cheney belonged to and whatnot, Donald Rumsfeld, after the 9/11 attacks and things of that nature. These things sort of came to the surface, and I think in people's conscious as opposed to subconscious. And so I wrote these books based on really just what I was seeing in the courts. Yeah. And then that sort of led to other investigations and research on many, many other topics as well, from my background, both as an attorney and as other things that I've done in my lifetime.
Do you think that reforms are needed in the courts?
Absolutely do. Unfortunately, money, the oligarchy, has a way of infecting everything, right? It's already kind of a given that big money can purchase the legislative branches of government. Obviously, the Founding Fathers, the genius of the Founding Fathers is that they created three. One was the judiciary, one was the executive branch, and one was the legislative. And the Founding Fathers did that so that there would be checks and balances on power. And they ran away from sort of old Europe with the monarchies and such, and that the people could basically, with the three branches of government, keep one another in check. And sort of money took over the executive branch pretty early. The legislative was a little harder because there's 500-something senators and 500 congressmen, and they each cost money. You've got to be in the billions or trillions or oligarchy, plutocracy to afford that. But when the judiciary started to fall, that really started to sort of quicken in pace after the 9/11 attacks, after the the terrorism scare came into play, right? In the 40s and 50s, it was communism and Nazism. But after 9/11, it became a technocratic dictatorship in a sense. And then we have Google, we have big tech, big media. And then when you have the judiciary being able to be purchased like jelly beans by the powers that be, that's when you started seeing scary and sad things happening. That if you had the gumption or the audacity to take on like a big company or a student loan company or a big tech media company, you would quickly get swatted swatted down by a federal judge, and not only swatted down under the color of law and authority, but you would probably also be sanctioned or threatened with contempt or jail. And this is something that has increased over time, and I think the Donald Trump administration sort of brought that to the forefront.
Of course, in the last year or so, we've talked a lot about Russian oligarchs. Do you think that maybe oligarchs in the West generally are forgotten about, maybe because a lot of people maybe don't know they exist?
It's a great question. We tend to say, okay, the Russian oligarchy is a fact. Obviously we're better than they are because we have democracy. We're the West, and all that. And that's kind of like the thing that we clung to for decades and decades. And I'm born here in New York, and I'm an Anglophile myself. I love Europe. I love this country. But we kind of, that put us to sleep for decades. The problem is that the oligarchy really doesn't recognize borders or countries. The oligarchy is essentially borderless. They have houses in Europe, they have houses in America, they have houses in Hong Kong, they have houses in Russia and Moscow, right? They're not really, they kind of are floating around, and they kind of like, they don't just shop from city to city, or nation to nation. I should say city to city. They shop from continent to continent, depending on the tax favorability or the laws, or not if they have a good relationship with the premier or the prime minister or the president. So there's more in common that we've discovered between the Russian oligarchy and the American oligarchy or even the Chinese oligarchy. You've got Jack Ma, for example, of Alibaba, who disappeared for a couple of months in communist China because apparently he said a few things that were not quote unquote politically correct. So he was we don't know what happened, but they think that he was quote unquote re-educated by the communist Chinese government. But a guy like him and a guy like Jeff Bezos of Amazon.com have probably more in common than me and Jeff Bezos or me and Jack Ma. And I don't really think they care about whether their government that they own or control is communist or a monarchy or a democracy or Republican form of government or a Islamic government. They don't really care. It doesn't apply to them. So one of my chapters that I wrote was how the global oligarchs are sort of merging with the global communists, because they just realized that it's a lot easier, the oligarchs at least, they realize it's a lot easier to team up with a communist government with the guns and the weapons and the tanks and the power to control the masses rather than have to deal with these civil rights of all these annoying peasants, people,
Yes.
I guess, right?
Yeah.
Of course, they can't say that in the United States. That's very un-American, or in Europe, you can't really say that. But I guess that's sort of what's happening. And I think last week you saw Elon Musk going to China and communist China. What were they talking about? Oh, to be a fly on the wall there.
Yeah.
To be a camera on the wall would have been a wonderful experience, I think. Probably followed the Chatham House rules, right? Nobody talks about it after they leave.
Is an American oligarch supportive of the current administration? Because we often talk about Russian oligarchs kind of being almost a friend of Vladimir Putin. So would an American oligarch be a big supporter of Joe Biden or whoever the president may be at the time?
Well, like I said earlier, the oligarchy, coming from whatever political persuasion, are tending to find out that the only ones who really understand them are other oligarchs.
Yeah.
And and I think that the olden days of all wealthy oligarchs who are total patriots of their country, like say a Hughes of America, Howard Hughes, are kind of gone. The chasm between the super plutocracy oligarchy and the masses is so massive at this point. The wealth factor and the differential is so huge that, like I said, what is it? 95% of Americans couldn't put their hands on $1,000 if their life depended on it, right? Yet you have some of these guys since COVID made trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in profits. We're not talking billions, we're talking trillions. So how does that work? The middle class is rapidly evaporating and disappearing, and we're resorting to some ancient sort of peasant class and nobleman class, I guess, if you will. And the middle class is disappearing very, very rapidly. So the communists, which we all know, shun private property ownership, right? That's part of the thing, that it's owned by the state, distributed to the masses. And the oligarchs own all the property. So whether you're in the United States or in Russia or Ukraine or Europe, if you're an oligarch and you quote unquote own all the property, you are the state. L'état c'est moi, like Napoleon said, right? L'état c'est moi. I am the state. So whatever government you want to call it for popular consumption, it has no bearing on them. So I think there's very little difference between the American oligarchy and the Russian oligarchy at this point in time. And I think it's just really right now the war over there there in Ukraine is really a war about what are going to be the new world order's value systems. It's really about value systems. I mean, right now, and I wrote an article recently about this in the Eurasia Review. I mean, the big players right now over there are, the Orthodox Christians, the conservative Catholics, white supremacists, Jewish supremacists, pan-Arabists, Islamic fundamentalists to some extent. Really, what are the value systems going to be? I guess, extreme homosexuals, extreme feminism, transgender rights. I mean, they're all kind of got skin in the game, yeah?
Yeah.
And they're realizing that the world is shrinking, and they don't want to be the last man out when the merry-go-round stops. So they're all kind of putting their lobbying power, their money, and their guns, and they're saying, okay, let me try to fight for what I think is freedom, to be free or to die. And so this is really World War III, but it's really about a war of human values and value systems and religious systems, rather than dollars and cents. I mean, the vultures are always there. The financial vultures like BlackRock are going to make money no matter what. Goldman Sachs, historically, they've always funded both sides of the war, right? Yeah. Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Greece, India, Pakistan, divide and rule, right? I mean, it's always, you support both sides, and whoever wins, hey, great, we still made our money. Yes. So the banks really don't care. It's the ideologues, the demagogues that care.
So, of course, you've written books. Is that the main way that you have been outspoken about these issues and tried to change it, or have you maybe tried to change it from within as well?
Well, there's a thing that came up that I read a while ago called the butterfly effect. I don't pretend to be anybody important. I'm just a lawyer on Wall Street for 20 years, but I've seen things and I have a big mouth, and I got ticked off, and I started writing things that I could prove. But the more that I wrote, there's sort of a pattern emerged, and sort of historical references could have come up. I think that the butterfly effect really is when somebody sort of flaps. It's, I guess, flapping the butterfly's wings in Asia, and then it turns into a typhoon in Italy or Madagascar or something. Yes. So with the internet, good ideas catch on, right? Twitter or whatever. But then you have the enemy there. These oligarchs and plutocrats who purchase massive shares of Twitter or Google or whatever, and then try to crush and cancel culture those big mouths who are making too much of a change, right? Yes. So, the United States, I never thought I would see it happen. The USA, supposedly the bastion of the First Amendment, freedom of speech, went ahead and canceled RT, Russian news network, or Sputnik, or some of the Chinese news, because they were so paranoid that they were winning the publicity war or the propaganda war. But I thought America was all about sharing ideas. So when that happened a couple of years ago, that was pretty amazing. When you had Russia, the new Russia, not the communist Russia, obviously the Russian Federation from 2000, under Putin, believe it or not, is not a communist country. They're starting over again. Right, and a lot of them had put their faith in the Orthodox Christian Church, Russian Orthodox Church under Patriarch Kirill, because they had nothing else. The communists had fleeced the country dry. And the oligarchs stole all the money, went and bought massive properties in London and New York and LA and Europe. And they became the oligarchs of the arms industry, the agriculture industry, the weapons industry, the wheat industry, the oil industry, whatever. If you were in the right place at the right time, you were now a Russian oligarch. When only 10 years before, you were some poor hump trying to earn a living as a state worker in the oil industry. But if you were on the right place at the right time, you became the billionaire oligarch who ran that business. And they quickly channeled all the money out of the Russian Federation into London, into property, into New York, into the West, and things of that nature.
Well, have you got any more books or projects that you're currently working on?
Deep State Defectors 1 through 5, from about 2017 to about 2023, are out and about. I'm currently working on Deep State Defector 6, because you can't keep a good man down, right?
Yes.
I write articles. I write articles for Eurasia Review and a couple other online periodicals. Whenever I have the time or whenever I'm inspired. Mostly alternative media productions, alternative media that don't censor. I came from a background where I was on Fox News, CNN, Court TV. I mean, I was on there all the time, repeating the mantras of the oligarchy, selling the BS, if you will. As a young, in my late 20s, early 30s, not really knowing much, not knowing any better, just honored and thankful that they were calling me. And I look back in some of those TV programs and I cringe a little bit. And I kind of like, I'm a little bit sad because I was very naive at the time.
Well, where are we able to find the books that you have came out with so far and everything else that you'd want us to find?
Barnes & Noble is a great supporter, barnesandnoble.com. But, we're available all over the world if you type in Deep State Defector. But one of the interesting things is Amazon.com/Kindle banned two of my books, which is interesting. I didn't know that Amazon and Kindle would actually ban books like Fahrenheit 495, but again, apparently they did. They banned my books and said that my content was too controversial. They told my publisher they wouldn't publish it. But Barnes & Noble went ahead and published it anyway, and that was really nice of them. But I find that my books are selling all around the world, wherever people are hungry to learn about the conspiracies, not based in, not some far-fetched conspiracy, but based in reality and fact and data that can be backed up, So they can be found all around the world, I think. But barnesandnoble.com is a great place to find them because none of them are banned. I would not recommend Amazon or Kindle because, like I said, they banned a book or two or three. I'm not even sure how many they banned. But apparently that's good for me because, when you ban something, then people want to buy it. So when I put it on Facebook, all of a sudden people were very interested in it.
Well, many thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thank you for this. I appreciate it.